So I came up with this build that has not only over 10,000 life, but also over 5,000 barrier. When we are fighting, it does go over 6k, and that is at level 87, 85 to 87, so I still have plenty of room to improve. The more mobs there are in an area, if you are in a giant room full of mobs, you get a much larger barrier. The more enemies, the higher the barrier, which is really, really good. So, and it works really nice. If you've never played a Diablo game, or if you've never played this type of game where you have to actively dodge enemy skills, the nice thing is you can tank just about anything. So if you're finding yourself struggling, dying on enemies, if you are trying to farm nightmare dungeons and you find yourself dying a lot, you're pushing 3,000, 5,000 HP, and that's just not enough. Today I'm going to show you how I made this build. So you can literally stand in anything, any explosion you can stand in. You can tank electrified obelisks. You can tank poison clouds. You can tank anything that explodes. And the nice thing is you don't have to run a barrier aspect, which frees up room for one more aspect. So right now I'm at 5,000. So, you know, between the barrier and the HP, I'm at over 15k, which is really, really nice. And especially if I stack barrier, if I know something's coming up. Let's say you're fighting in a dungeon that has blood blisters, and we all know how much those blood blisters hurt. And then all of a sudden, you're fighting enemies, and you go, oh my god, I don't have time to get to that blood blister. It's going to explode. It's going to kill me. With this build, you don't have to. All you do is pop a potion, and the barrier is automatically generated. Here's what you can expect in this video. I'm going to go over how I made this build. We're going to start out with skills. We're going to go into some gear options as well. Then we're going to talk about some aspects. Then we're going to move into the new Paragon board that I created for this. The Paragon board looks like this. We're going to dive into all of that. And then I'm going to give you some options, not only for different skills, if you want to run it slightly different than I'm running it, but also different aspects as well, because everyone has different playstyles. Then we're going to go over nice to have gear, acceptable gear with some different gear options. And the beauty of this build is there is no legendary or unique gear requirements. Let's dive in. So the build works like this. Let's go ahead and take a look at the skills. This is a Twisting Blades build, and the beauty of this build is it actually, the more enemies you have in a clustered area, the more healing you get, and that is primarily thanks to the Pants of Temerity. Effects that heal you beyond 100% life grant you barrier. This, of course, you don't need. This is not a absolute requirement. This is a nice to have. We're going to go over all of this gear, but let's start off with the skills, and then I'll talk about the gear. So looking at the skills, this is going to be the core build. We are going to go with puncture, 1 point in puncture. Let me maximize this so you can see it better. We're going to go 1 point in puncture. We're going to take enhanced puncture as well. And then we want the vulnerability from the fundamental puncture. That is going to be really nice. That's what's going to give us the majority of the damage. For this build, the beauty of this build is you can either run Twisting Blades if you like it, or you can run Flurry. Flurry is very good. Twisting Blades I found a little bit better, although it takes a little bit extra mobility to make it work a little bit better and set up better. But I've tried both, and they both work very well. So you can run whatever build you like. So for this, I'm going to go Twisting Blades, and then I'm going to go Enhanced Twisting Blades. Twisting Blades deal 30% increased damage when returning. Okay, next we're going to take Improved Twisting Blades. Enemies are dazed while impaired with Twisting Blades, of course, on the way there and on the way back, which is really, really nice. Mine is rank 9 out of 5. That is from gear. Next, we're going to take Sturdy. We gain 12% close damage reduction, which is very nice, especially for pushing higher tiers. And then we're going to go into Siphoning Strikes. Siphoning Strikes is not necessary for this build, but I find it very good for the healing since I don't really need to use a lot of potions. And the beauty of this is you can actually level with this build, especially if you take Siphoning Strikes, and you can level with the Paragons that I have. I'll show you that in a minute. We're going to go over all of that. Next, we're going to go 1 point into Shadow Step, Enhanced Shadow Step, and then we're going to go into Disciplined Shadow Step. Cooldown is reduced when we Shadow Step, which is nice. If you want to go into Stunned, you can also use the Stun if you prefer. We're not going to need it. We have some different options to stun enemies on our gear, on our aspects. Next, we're going to take 1 point into Dash, Enhanced Dash. Enemies dazed by dash take 15% increased critical strike damage, and that's going to go really nice with the aspect of the smoke grenade, where I'll show you in a minute. And then we're going to go into Methodical Dash. Now, these are all kind of core requirements. 3 out of 3 weapon mastery is a must. Now, what I did here is actually very interesting. I went into Concussive. After knocking back and knocking down an enemy, you gain 12% increased critical strike chance. And that's going to be really, really good against them. We're going to be knocking enemies down a lot. Our evade cooldown is also reduced by half a second when we daze an enemy. 1 point in there. And 1 point in trick attacks. When we critically strike a dazed enemy, they are knocked down. So this build has a ton of crowd control, and we're going to keep the enemy stunned. Moving down to the subterfuge skills. One thing that we're going to take for this build is Smoke Grenade, and we're going to put 1 point into Enhanced Smoke Grenade. Now, why Smoke Grenade? Enemies affected by Smoke Grenade take 20% increased damage from us, and that is actually going to proc right off of our dash, so we're not even going to use this on our skill bar. What I am currently using is this Poison Trap. It's only rank 1 out of 5. You can put as many points of this if you want. And then I went down into Enhanced Poison Trap and Countering Poison Trap. Poison Trap has a 30% chance to reset your imbuement skill cooldown. So I'm actually running Shadow Imbuement with Poison Trap. It has a 30% chance when it procs to reset Shadow Imbuement, which is very, very nice. But we have a couple of different options here. Let me finish the tree, and then I'll give you some options. Next, I'm going to be running Shadow Imbuement. Right now, it's 12 out of 5. That's coming off of my gear. We're going into Enhanced Shadow Imbuement as well. You have 15% increased critical strike chance against injured enemies affected by Shadow Imbuement, which is nice. And then when Shadow Imbuement explodes, it makes enemies vulnerable, and that is where we get all of our damage. Okay, we're going to put 1 point into Consuming Shadows for a little bit of extra energy. And then we're going to put 1 point into Shadow Damage, has 10% chance to stun for half a second. Next, we're going to be moving down into Precision Imbuement. Imbued skills have 9% increased critical strike chance. That is going to work out really, really nice. So this Deadly Venom, Alchemist Advantage, and Debilitating Toxins I'm going to talk about in a minute. This is also an option here. The other option is Frigid Finesse and Chilling Weight. We're going to come back to that in a second. We're going to move down to our ultimate skills. We are not going to take any ultimate skills at all. What we are going to take is Adrenaline Rush, which is very nice. While moving, we have 5% increased energy regen. And we're also going to put 3 points into Haste. And coming down to our key passives, I'm running Momentum. Momentum works very, very nice. While at 3 stacks of Momentum, we gain 20% increased damage reduction. We gain 30% more energy and 15% movement speed. And that works out really nice. I really enjoy it. Okay, let's talk about some options. Basic skill is a must. Puncture is a must. Right down here, Twisting Blades, you can go into Flurry. I have not tried Penetrating Shot, have not tried Rapid Fire. If you want to try Rapid Fire, this could work. I haven't tried it, so maybe that's something you want to experiment with. But if you like Flurry, you can run Flurry or Twisting Blades, option 1. Okay, everything in the agility skills is pretty much a must. I would leave it the way that it is set up. Coming down to the subterfuge skills. Let's say you don't like Poison Trap. You don't have to run Poison Trap. You can run Dark Shroud if you want to, or you can run Smoke Grenade. You have 3 different options here. Concealment is okay. The cooldown is fairly long. I don't really care for it, but you do have 3 different options here. Here's what my skill bar looks like. I have Dash, I have Shadow Imbuement, I have Poison Trap, I have Shadow Step, and then of course we have Puncture and Twisting Blade. So if you want to run Smoke Grenade, you can run Smoke Grenade instead of Poison Trap, or if you want to run Dark Shroud, I would take the increased movement speed, which is very, very good for speed running dungeons. So you have 3 options there. And during the editing of this video, I'll try to give you some aspects and some gear options as well for each one of those. So let's say you're running Dark Shroud with the increased movement speed to speed run dungeons because you're leveling glyphs. And now you're at the point where you want to push a little bit harder. You want to push higher. We have a couple options here. Poison Trap allows us to push harder, not only for the reset, but also what we can do is we can come down here and we can actually spec into Deadly Venom to get to the back. You deal 3% increased poison damage. We're not super concerned about this unless you're running Poison Imbuement. That is also an option. Since I'm running Shadow, I'm only going to put 1 point into here. And then we're going to go into Debilitating Toxins. Poison enemies deal 10% less damage, which is going to help out. If you want to go 15%, you can. And then what we can actually do is put 3 points into Alchemist Advantage. You gain 3% increased attack speed for each enemy you've poisoned, up to 15%. That will allow you not only a lot more damage reduction, but also a lot more attack speed as well. And that'll help to push dungeons. The other option here is Frigid Finesse as well. We're going to jump into that in a second. Let's look at the gear. So looking at gear, as I've mentioned, right now, this doesn't have any requirements at all. You don't need any uniques, but there are a couple of nice to have. So let's start from the top and work our way down. Right now, I'm running a helmet with Life on Kill and 4 ranks to Shadow Imbuement. That is the ultimate helmet that we want. The only thing I'm missing here is armor, right? So ultimately, you want to get something with Life on Kill and ranks to Shadow Imbuement, and if you can, armor percentage. That is nice to have. That is your ultimate goal right here. A couple of options for this build. You have something like this where you can take, it has total percentage armor, 2 ranks to Shadow Imbuement, some resistance, and some reduction in crowd control duration. That is acceptable as well. Anything with resistance, lightning resistance is very, very good as well. And anything with total armor will do. And what you're ultimately looking for is Life on Kill and 3 ranks to Shadow Imbuement. And when it's upgraded all the way to 5, you will get 4 ranks. The other option for this is something like this. Now, this doesn't have to be legendary. You can use just a rare yellow helmet. Cold resistance is okay. Barrier regeneration, not so much. Life on Kill again, and we're looking for ranks to Shadow Imbuement. Since I am running Shadow Imbuement, we're looking for those ranks. Moving over to the chest piece. Now, what you are primarily looking for is damage reduction from close enemies, regular damage reduction, and if you can, damage reduction from distant enemies. That will help a ton. The other couple of nice to haves here is lightning resistance. For me personally, I found that the lightning obelisk does a ton of damage, and I wanted some extra lightning resistance. Okay, couple of options that are nice to have. Something like this is okay. Cutthroat skills damage is increased. Damage reduction from close enemies. Again, we're looking for damage reduction. Damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. This is okay. And I re-rolled into lightning resistance. Frost is okay. You can actually shadow step out of frost. You can dodge poison. You can walk around, all that stuff. But lightning resistance, that is something that I struggle with. So that, for me, is helpful. The other acceptable piece here is going to be something like this. Maximum life, imbued skill damage. Now, you can take or leave cold resistance on there. That is going to be okay. That is up to you. But if you can find something with extra armor percentage, that will help out a lot. Aspects we're going to touch on in a second. Those are all interchangeable. Let's jump into the gloves. What you are ultimately looking for on the gloves is 3 to 4 ranks of Twisting Blades. They start at 3. When it's upgraded, it goes to 4. Strength is okay, but what you're looking for is the ranks 2, Twisting Blades or Flurry, depending on what you're running, and a lucky hit, 5% chance to heal for a bunch of life, and attack speed. That is what makes these gloves really, really nice. These are a nice to have, not an absolute requirement, but as you level, you will get these. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm only level 87 right now, and I'm doing really, really well. Couple of acceptable options here. Ignore the aspect on the bottom. 12% attack speed for 4 seconds after dodging an attack. That's very nice. 22% damage to injured enemies works as well. Chance to slow and ranks to Twisting Blades. Okay, so on the gloves, we're primarily looking for ranks to Twisting Blades. Again, ranks to Twisting Blades here. Critical strike chance, critical strike damage with imbued skills, and dexterity. Those are all acceptable. Making an enemy vulnerable is fantastic on these gloves. We're going to go over this in a second, but this is what you want. Moving over to the pants. I'm actually running Pants of Temerity. Pants of Temerity are really, really good. That's what gives us a ton of sustain, and it gives us that gigantic barrier that you've seen. Couple of acceptable options depending on what you are running. 14 to all stats is okay. Plus 3 ranks to Poison Trap if you are running Poison Trap and you like it. But we're looking for primarily damage reduction and damage reduction from close enemies. And the same thing again. Imbuement skills cooldown is very nice. Willpower is okay. It'll give us a little bit more healing. Don't really want it. We're probably better off with dexterity or intelligence. Damage reduction again, and damage reduction from distant enemies. If you don't have Pants of Temerity, this is something that's very, very good. And you can actually imprint the barrier on this instead of the Pants of Temerity. One of the reasons I like Pants of Temerity is because it actually gives us almost 100% uptime barrier. As long as we are hitting enemies, we're healing. So we don't need a barrier aspect on this because we're getting so much healing with these pants that the barrier is always active. Moving over to the boots, this is a sore spot for me. These boots are primarily max evade charges. What you are looking for on the boots is either increased movement speed with evade or max evade charges. Now, you have a couple of options here. If you're running max evade charges, right now I have 4 evade charges. So if you are running boots with 3 to 4 evade charges, you can actually run the aspect. When you evade or shadow step, you leave behind a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal a bunch of damage. And because I'm always evading, I have 4 charges. That will work out really, really well. The other option is here is the Penitent Greaves, the Frost Greaves, which I don't have. That is a sore spot for me. 87 levels. I still haven't gotten a drop of the Frost Greaves. Hashtag pray for bear. So originally this build was made around the Penitent Greaves because off season I got multiple pairs. In this season I got no pairs, so I ended up making this build with no uniques required. And what you are primarily looking for on the boots is movement speed, dodge chance, and then for me, as I mentioned before, I went lightning resistance, and energy cost reduction is good. Okay, so since we are talking about Penitent Greaves, we got to go back to the skills. If we are running Penitent Greaves, one of the things we can talent into is actually Frigid Finesse. You deal 5% increased damage to chilled enemies. This bonus is increased to 10% against frozen. And we're going to put 3 points into Frigid Finesse, and that's going to give us a lot of extra damage because when we are running around with the Greaves, we are actually chilling everything around us, and that'll give us a lot of extra damage, which is very, very nice. Moving over to the weapon. The weapon we are looking for on this rogue is a two-handed crossbow. Now, why two-handed crossbow? The crossbow will actually give us a lot more damage to vulnerable enemies on this one, but also it'll give us a lot more damage to close enemies as well. If you are using a regular bow, most of the damage on a regular bow will be to distant enemies, and we're looking for close enemies. So since we are looking at this left side, as I mentioned, everything, all of the aspects are interchangeable with the exception of the legendary crossbow. On your two-handed crossbow, you want to imprint Twisted Blades. They orbit for a short time and they return to you, dealing 30% of Twisting Blades damage. And based on the distance they travel, they deal more damage. So you want to put this on your crossbow because that will give you a lot more damage. Going back to the skill tree, remember we talented into Smoke Grenade. One of the nice things is a Smoke Grenade, actually, when we dash, it drops a Smoke Grenade, and enemies affected by Smoke Grenade take 20% increased damage. So, on my helmet, one of the aspects I have is we automatically drop a Smoke Grenade at the end of a dash, and then we also reduce the dash's cooldown. This can be used offensively or defensively, which is nice. You can either dash out of stuff, or you can literally dash into a group of enemies, and as you dash in, Smoke Grenade will go down, and they'll take 20% more damage. This doesn't have to go on the helmet. This aspect literally can go anywhere. On the chest, I have basic skills grant 20% damage reduction. Gloves you really, really want. Making an enemy vulnerable has 60% chance to grant 3% increased critical strike chance up to 9. So you're getting 9% critical strike right there. I'm currently running like 24% crit, not including the procs, off the gloves and off some of my skills. To Pants of Temerity we went over. If you don't have Pants of Temerity, you can literally use rare pants, and then you can just imprint the aspect of barrier. You can put the barrier on it. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier absorbing 3,500 damage. That'll work out really well. Boots we went over. Dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has a 41% chance to daze them for 2 seconds. That is the aspect that you want. Unless you're running Penitent Greaves, then you want to put this aspect somewhere else. Legendary crossbow we went over. Twisting Blades, that is the aspect that goes on it. Now, moving over to the necklace side. The thing that you really, really want is ranks to all imbuement skills. Right now, I was able to find a +3. There is a +4, I believe. I could not find that one. And what you are looking for is a critical strike chance against injured enemies, critical strike damage, and intelligence helps out as well. And of course, resistances to all elements. Right now, the aspect I have is just an armor aspect for more survivability, but you can imprint any of the aspects on here from the left side here of the gear. Okay, moving over to rings. Rings you are primarily looking for damage to injured enemies, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage. Maximum life is also very, very good. Critical strike damage with imbued skills is good as well. And then I actually re-rolled here shadow damage. Shadow damage works out really well. Now, as for aspects, attacking enemies with basic skills increases the damage of your next core skill. And then on this other aspect right here, if you are running max evade charges, I have 4 evade charges currently on my boots. So if you are running a lot of evade charges, you can get this. When you evade a shadow step, you leave behind a cluster of exploding grenades. And that works out really well. For weapons, I am currently running Condemnation. Your core skills deal 30% of increased damage when we're using basic combo points, and we have a chance to generate a bunch of combo points. And the other one is Ashira's Dagger. Now, it is not a requirement. It is a nice to have. Both of these are nice to have. They're not requirements. And these drop very frequent, but if you don't have any of these, you can use a couple of yellow swords or a couple of yellow daggers. Some of the acceptable aspects for these weapons, if you are using regular yellow weapons, skills deal up to 20% damage based on your primary resource. If you are using that, you want to go ahead and go to your specialization and take Inner Sight. Right now, I am using combo points because I'm running Condemnation. The other aspect that you can actually run is damaging chilled or frozen enemy with a shadow imbued skill releases an explosion. That is a good one as well. And then the other one you can also run is basic skills. Gain 30% increased attack speed on your weapons. Those will all work. Okay, so looking at gems, I have experimented both with rubies and topazes. Now, rubies, of course, will give you a lot more HP, but if you find yourself dying frequently, especially to crowd control, go ahead and slap some topazes in here. If you want to do all of them in topaz, that would be fine. So you could do 1 in the helmet, 2 in the chest, and 2 in the pants. That way, if you're finding yourself crowd controlled a lot and dying to CC, especially if there are elites with frozen, I know some of the vampire mobs have some kind of a stun mechanic where they channel a lightning-based damage attack, and that stuns you for a little while. So I've come across that recently. 3 of them were frozen, and on top of that, they were channeling the lightning to stun me, and I found myself dying to them. So I actually replaced the gems with topazes. I do have a ruby in the helmet, but that can come out. Looking at the weapons, the gems we want are Royal Emeralds, 2 in the Legendary Crossbow, and then 1 each weapon for the melee weapons. And that is going to go hand in hand really well with the extra vulnerability damage. Okay, before we move into Paragons, let's talk about what this build is not. This build is not a poison or trap build. We are not focusing here on poison imbuement, and we are not focusing here on traps. So if you are going poison imbuement or poison trap, even though I am using poison trap, I am not maximizing the damage. I'm using it for other effects. So if you want to go that route, this Paragon board will not work. Moving into the Paragon board, we start off on the bottom. Now, I have been experimenting a little bit with this to find something a little bit better to get into board number 5, which I finally got into. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the very first board. This board is the very first board at level 50, and we're going up the right side. We're going into damage, and then we're going to come up here, and we're going to prioritize dexterity, and we're going to get the closer glyph. And that is going to get leveled to 15 right away. That's going to be our first priority. And over time, we will level it to 21. Next, if you want to come up here and get the armor, you can. However, you don't have to. You can save these 2 points for something a little bit later as you start pushing harder dungeons. I recently talented into this at tier 45 and up Nightmare. I have just completed my first tier 50, and that was really, really good. Just actually recently completed it, and that went very well. Can definitely push higher. Need a little bit more damage, I would say, and that will come very, very soon, hopefully, from upgrading some of these weapons. Closer glyph, dexterity. Over time, you want to try to move over into these dexterity points here. Try and max out dexterity, but for right now, we're going to keep it very simple. We're going to do this. Go ahead and take a screenshot if you must. And then we're going to come up and get this damage node as fast as possible. This is going to take you a couple of levels, but luckily they come up quick. We get 4 Paragons per level, so it's not too bad. Moving over into the secondary board. Secondary board is going to be Tricks of the Trade. Not only are we going to be talenting into this Marksman node, which Cutthroat skills will increase the damage of Marksman, and Marksman skills will increase the damage of Cutthroat. If you don't know, Puncture is a marksman skill, and then Twisting Blades is a cutthroat skill. By the way, it's hot outside. I have my air conditioner running, so please forgive the fan in the back. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come up here, and we're going to, first node we're going to pick up is the 45% critical strike damage. Of course, you will need 270 intelligence, but as you go, you're going to pick up more. And then we're going to come up here for the second glyph, and that is going to be combat. We're going to grab a few intelligence note, and this is pretty much just an X right here, all the way to the left, or almost all the way to the left, to the rare node for extra damage to elites, and then a few nodes down. This is going to get leveled to 15 second, and then we're actually going to come up, grab some armor, bang left, and then come right down here to Tricks of the Trade. Next, we're going over into board number 3. This is going to be no witnesses. What I did for this is prioritizing dexterity. I came up here, went into 50% damage, 75% damage to healthy enemies. You can grab a couple of these other points as well. And then we're going to come down right into our third glyph. Now, for this glyph, I'm using efficacy, and I've talked about this a little bit. Not only does it help our movement skills by increasing the potency by 20%, but we're also getting a lot more extra life. We're getting 20% more extra life, and we're also getting an extra 67% damage, so that helps. If you don't have the glyph of efficacy, you can actually pull this out, and you can see the damage drops off significantly. And here you can actually use control. If you have Penitent Greaves, which are the ones that give you frost, you can actually use control. I don't have them, so it's unfortunate, but if you put control in here, you'll have to put a couple more extra points into intelligence, and that should be fine. For this, as mentioned, I am using efficacy. That is what's comfortable for me. I like playing a tankier build. Okay, now we're going to grab this node here. We're going to grab this node here. We are not taking no witnesses. When we're going straight down, we're going to prioritize dexterity as we go straight down. And from here, you have a couple of options. Ideally, we want to make it down here for the damage reduction. If you are not pushing tier 50 and up, tier 45 and up in Nightmare Dungeons, you can leave this alone. You really don't need this. So the first thing you want to do here is you want to come down and grab this glyph. I am using Diminish, which is working out pretty nice. You don't have to use Diminish, as mentioned before. You can use Control, or you can use Turf. Turf is one of the ones that I leveled up for this build. Turf will work very, very nice. It gives us a lot of extra damage to close enemies. But as I mentioned before, I like to experiment. So as I was leveling Diminish, I wanted to try out Diminish because of this extra vulnerable damage. So potato, potato, right? Take one, try one. If one doesn't work, try the other one. With Diminish, we actually get a lot more extra vulnerability damage, so that is something I've been playing around with. And on top of that, also, as I'm pushing 50 plus in Nightmare, I wanted to put some extra healing for my potions as well, because I have a very high HP pool, and I wanted to get some extra healing. If this glyph wasn't there, healing's only 12%. So on this one, you can use Turf if you like. Turf will work, or Diminish will work, depending on your style of preference. And what you want to do is you want to come over here and grab this vulnerable damage. Now, of course, by the time you get to your 4th Paragon board, you will be in the 80s. And by the way, what this build is not a level 100 build. This build is not designed for pushing level 100 Nightmare Dungeons, but you can level with this build. This is very effective. I've used this build to level, and it works out very, very nice. After you get this, you want to come over to this left side, grab this vulnerable damage as well, and then you want to push into Exploit Weakness. This one down here you really don't need unless you are pushing tier 50 and up, tier 45 and up. And then our last board, I haven't quite figured that out just yet. This might change as I get closer to 100. But at this point, I am level 90. I still have 10 levels to go. And the idea for me is to come up here, go over to this first glyph, and then we're going to use control here, assuming I get my Penitent Greaves before I hit level 100. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab this damage reduction node. We're going to grab damage to crowd control enemies. And then we're most likely going to go into here, into Cheap Shot. So depending on how many points I have, I will play around with this and experiment with this. And this will most likely change by the time I hit level 100, so I can start pushing 60, 70, and 80 tier Nightmare Dungeons. So as stated previously, you can level with this build. This is not a pushing build to level 100, but you can use it to level to 100. It works very nice. one option here is if you are finding yourself dying, you can actually swap boards 2 and 3. So you can actually switch Tricks of the Trade with No Witnesses, right? You can take No Witnesses and you can actually replace this here. And then board 2, this is going to be your board 2 right here, No Witnesses. And it's going to look exactly the same. So you will take board 3, put it into board 2's spot, and then what you're going to end up doing is you're actually going to end up going left because you'll be starting on the bottom, you'll be ending on the left, and then you're actually going to be going left to the left side and attaching this Tricks of the Trade board right from here, and then you're going to be going down. So essentially, glyph 4 is going to be on the bottom. And by the time you fill out glyph 4, you're going to be in the 90s. You will most likely either not need board 5, or you can redo it to something a little bit different. Here's a much cleaner final look at the Paragon board. Paragon board number 1 is right here. This is the one we start with. We're going to go with closer, level that to 15. And we're going to run right up like this. So this is a much cleaner look. Feel free to screenshot it and follow this along. Moving over to board number 2. I remastered this just a little bit for a little more dexterity points, and especially to save a little bit of points right on the bottom here. We are still getting the Havoc rare node for extra critical damage. Glyph number 2 is going to be combat. So we're going to start out with closer in the first board, and then we're going to move into the second board, glyph number 2, which is going to be combat, and we're going to go straight up. So this essentially is a fairly cleaner look, just a giant X right from the top to the bottom, and then side to side, and then we're going to get Tricks of the Trade. And we're also going to grab this here. Moving over into board number 3, that is the way I have it set up. This is going to be No Witnesses. And once again, this is a little bit of a cleaner look, so I wanted to post-edit this, made sure that you had something clean to follow. Now, for here, we are going to come down and go into efficacy for reasons mentioned earlier. I like the extra maximum life, and I like the extra damage as well. But if at this point of the game you have Penitent Greaves, you can literally drop control in its slot. Okay, coming down, we are going to grab this training node for the extra life, and we're going to go straight down, prioritizing dexterity, right down into board number 4. Board number 4 is going to be Exploit Weakness, and the very first priority for Exploit Weakness is going to be this glyph. We're going to grab this glyph as a very first thing, and we're going to use Turf. After some testing between Diminish and Turf, I found that Turf is much better than Diminish, even though Diminish gives us a lot more vulnerability damage. Turf just straight out beats it for extra damage and the clear speed for mobs. Once we get this glyph, we're going to come up top, get the extra healing from our potions. Then we're going to target into the vulnerable damage as well. And we're going to come right down here and get Exploit Weakness. Whenever you deal damage to a vulnerable enemy, they take 1% increased damage for 4 seconds up to 15%. That's going to be really good for dungeon bosses. And of course, that pesky Butcher. You can literally stand toe-to-toe with Butcher, so that's going to be really cool. And then if you're pushing level 50 Nightmare tier dungeons, you can talent into damage reduction. That'll help a little bit. And then on board 5 looks like this. We're going to go into Cheap Shot. We deal 5% increased damage for each nearby enemy that is crowd controlled. And right here, we're going to take the first 3 dexterity nodes. And then from here, I'm most likely going to be going down into Glyph Socket, which I'm going to use Control. I've talked about this a few times because I don't have the Penitent Greaves right now, which are the Frost Boots. I am going to be using Control very last, wherever that glyph is. And from there, I am going to be coming down into this Devious node right here, 15% damage to crowd control enemies, and another 15% if we have enough intelligence, which we should. And then we're going to finish off with a Cheap Shot. That is going to be our last legendary node. And as mentioned previously, you can use this build as a leveling build up to level 100. At level 100, as you start pushing tier 60 dungeons and up, we might need to change some of this around, but that is a long ways off if you are still leveling. So go ahead and take a screenshot of this. Board 1 goes into board 2. You can take a screenshot of this or pause the video, come back to this at any time. Board 2, as I've mentioned, is Tricks of the Trade. Board 3 is No Witnesses. Board 4 is Exploit Weakness, and board 5 is actually Cheap Shot. One thing I wanted to make sure I did not forget to talk about was the Wrathful Hearts. The best Wrathful Heart to use for this is your attacks have a 15% chance to apply all imbuement skills, and that'll actually work with basic skills. The other heart that I found very useful was the Brutal Heart, which suppresses 20% of incoming damage, and then it releases all damage and explodes for 250%, dealing a bunch of fire damage to nearby enemies. Now, for heart number 3, you have options. You can either use the Immunity Heart, or the one that I really like is the Vicious Heart, where you gain 80% critical strike damage with your critical strikes, but your non-critical strike damage is reduced. And since our crit rate is pretty high for this build, we are going to be hitting really hard. So you can use a Vicious Heart in socket 3. So we essentially have one of each color. If you don't have the heart that applies all imbuement attacks to skills, you can use this heart that cycles through different bonuses until you get the one we're really looking for. Jumping into a tier 56 Nightmare Dungeon, how do we actually play this build? The first thing we want to do is open up with Shadow Imbuement. Then we want to use Twisting Blades. After using Twisting Blades, we want to dash over to the other side, at which point the Smoke Grenade will drop from our aspect, increasing the damage enemies take by 20%. Then I like to open up with Poison Trap, not only for a 30% chance to reset Shadow Imbuement, but also for the knocking down ability. And then we want to use Shadow Imbuement again, Twisting Blades, and at that point we want to either Shadow Step or dash back over to the other side, and the idea is to keep the Twisting Blades moving from side to side. So provided the room has close enemies, as long as they are not all ranged enemies will be a little bit more difficult, but the idea is the same. We want to open up Shadow Imbuement, Twisting Blades, dash over to the other side. As the Twisting Blades return, they will actually deal a lot more damage to the enemies. And of course, we want to focus on the damage resistance aura first so we can actually kill the enemies. And we just want to rinse and repeat from one side to the other, utilizing our mobility and destroying everything in its path. Alright, so there is the build guide. I went over everything in pretty good detail, tried to give you lots of options, not only for gear, not only for aspects, but skills as well, and lots of different ways you can play. So, if you found this guide helpful, I need you to do two things. Number one, smash that thumbs up button. That will tell me that you enjoyed this guide, that you found value in this guide, and that will encourage me to make more guides like this in the future. And number two, share this video with a friend. Maybe you know somebody that is struggling and can watch this video. Doing those two things will help my channel grow, and I would appreciate it tremendously. And if you want to further help my channel grow as well, hit the playlist at the top right of the screen and just let that sucker play for a while. That'll give me some extra watch hours, and that will also tell YouTube to recommend my videos a little more, and that should help my channel grow as well. With that said, I'm BearCozy. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in game.